All guests on ZASLOW Show 2.0 brought to us by the official beer of the program, Johnny Cuba, European roots, a Caribbean soul, refreshing German lager in a can. Pick up a six-pack of Johnny Cuba, your local Sedanos, Presidente, Winn-Dixie, Fresco y Mas. That's how you can enjoy the Heat game tonight. We got the weekend. You're sitting on your couch. You're drinking responsibly. And don't forget Johnny Cuba's mantra, stay tranquilo. Joining us now, we are 9 days away from the Super Bowl. Mike Golic Jr., we always like when he checks in with us. Gojo and Golic, you can watch every morning on YouTube. Mike, always good to see you. It's an interesting dynamic you have with your show because you do your show with your father. Who enjoys doing the show more? Son with his father or father with his son?
I'd say mom watching both. Like, I feel like it's basically just turned into like a giant means of having like a family Zoom call every day where everyone gets to check in. My brother and sister now both have young kids. And so we've started to brainwash them early with the content. My nephew Jackson every morning gets to sit there and eat his breakfast and watch me and dad up on TV. Usually gives us a good point, maybe even a wave. He's starting to get a little more verbal now. So we're getting a lot of, my dad wants to go by Pappy as his grandpa name. I don't know how that's going to work out, but we're getting a lot of Pappy and Mike points now. So I feel like that's the real joy, is getting ready to brainwash my niece and nephew to make sure that they like us and want to hang out with us.
It's a very big deal for, I know this because I have teenage boys. It's a very big deal for the grandparents. What they want to be called, right? Because they don't want a name that connotates them feeling really old. So that's a big decision for your father, right?
Absolutely. We've got Pappy and then we've got Gigi for my mom as grandma. So my mom's like sounds cool, sounds very hip. Pappy, I feel like goes the opposite direction where it does make you like a Pappy is generally very old. So dad's leaning into that, though. He's always wanted the Moses coming back from the burning bush look of all the touch of gray. And he's cultivated that very well.
How much difference, I'm sure you've experienced it because you were a kid when your father was doing mornings on ESPN. Do you ever, or does he ever think just how different a talk show host he was back then to what he is now? Because the contrast is pretty stark.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's just a lot less of him in general. Like we saw the other day, that Reggie White documentary, the 30 for 30 that ESPN did, when they brought my dad on air, and it was very somber. It was one of the first times I saw my dad cry as a kid was when he's in studio surrounded by these images of the now departed Reggie White. And the number one takeaway for us watching that documentary was, my God, Dad, you couldn't step away from the table back then. So at the very least, now the takes are coming from a lot less mass behind them there. But no, I think more for Dad too, it's the technology around it. He always tells the story of when him and Greeny first started doing the show, they were getting notes and correspondence from literal fax machines that were printing out during the show. And now everything's done by Google Doc. We're both full remote for this, and he's got the whole at-home setup. So the world around this has changed a lot, even if the actual broadcasting within it is probably not all that different.
Well, and isn't it unbelievable? I mean, like, this is very Mike and the Mad Dog style, where if we're talking in the mid-90s and you're doing a sports talk show just with the newspaper in front of you. Like, can you imagine us doing shows right now and we don't have the internet? How do you fill 3-4 hours if you don't have the internet? You just have today's newspaper?
It is amazing to think about now and how much that's changed really the entire industry. I mean, to that extent too, think about, for me growing up, I'm 34 now. So SportsCenter, when I was a kid into a young adult into college, was the number one medium to acquire that. You used to just sit in the dorm room all day and I'd watch 3 or 4 different versions of SportsCenter to wait and see what happened because we were early internet at that point. It completely changed the way that show operated. Certainly, yeah. I sit with Twitter open during the entire show waiting to see, hey, did we get any breaking news here? Hey, did anyone else say something funny we can pull in here now? It's an information highway and basically like another producer chair added to every show. So how they got through that, the producers back then really worth their weight in gold. Whatever they were paying them wasn't nearly enough.
It's amazing. I know you love Taylor Swift. I've seen this. You are a Taylor Swift fan. So have you been offended with the negative coverage around her? Because I got to tell you, I feel like we're now slanting. I feel like we're doing a little bit of a 180 right now heading into the game where you got people who are pushing back on the Taylor Swift coverage, the hate of Taylor Swift. And now it's kind of like, leave this girl alone. There's nothing wrong with what she's doing. We like her involvement here. I feel like it's turning the corner a little bit.
Yeah, it definitely is, but we're at like this. I think the snake eating our tail is probably like an apt comparison here, where the story is just about the reaction now. It's not been about Taylor Swift anymore. It's just everybody getting to state which side of the aisle they fall on and their arguments. And, now we've got, once it rises to the point where Colin Cowherd is talking about it, where it's like, all right, we're near the end of this cycle where thankfully it's just going to become normal, because it seems like this thing is, people started off questioning whether the relationship was legit, was it staged? There's still a bunch of weird, nut jobs on the internet who are calling this some sort of like, government psyop for the upcoming election and all that stuff, which is just nonsense. But I think we're hopefully going to get to a point now where we don't even have to talk about the reaction anymore. It's a reality of the situation. It's a fun subplot to the Super Bowl because we've got her out in Japan at the show, and she's going to probably try to be getting out there to see Travis play in this game. And hopefully we can just get back to the thing being the story and not everyone's reaction to the thing being what we spend our time spinning the wheels on.
What have you made of the commentary around Brock Purdy?
Somewhat surprising and somewhat unsurprising. Like, it's an objectively cool story about a guy who's maximized his physical abilities and the opportunity there. We talk so much about how for any quarterback, we probably don't give enough credit to the surroundings in terms of how they turn out. Meaning we expect all these first round quarterbacks to come in and be able to lift the team out of obscurity and bootstraps the entire organization, when organizational health, the roster around you, the coaching staff, the front office all matter so much in giving these guys a chance. It's why we see so many first round quarterbacks fail. That's even more so for a guy drafted in Brock's position, whereas the last pick in the draft, you're barely supposed to make the team, let alone actually have an impact on the field. And so those surroundings do matter, but he's made the most of the opportunity to get to this point in a way that's a Disney movie. But when the quarterback position in the NFL, where it gets hairy is, one, as a team, he's been a part of accomplishing to a level that puts him eye to eye with some of the best and most tenured quarterbacks in football in a way that's not really fair to him. And so on one side, he's being thrust into conversations that are probably a little bit too early for his football life cycle. And then on the other side, when you start to interact with Niners fans that push back on this, there's so much ego tied into the way that we perceive our quarterbacks, especially for fans of a franchise, because it's the face of the franchise. If you've got the quarterback problem answered, boy, you've got everything figured out. And so feeling like you're one of the haves, feeling like you're one of the teams that's got a guy at that spot, there's a lot of ego that comes with that sometimes obscures the rest of the picture, where anytime we talk about the rest of that 49ers roster as having an impact, it's skewed as a slight or viewed as a slight, when in actuality, like Cam Newton the other day said, Brock Purdy's probably not even the 10th best player on his team. That to me is just a testament of the roster that you've managed to build. I mean, you swung and missed on a first-round quarterback that you traded 3 first-round picks. Most places don't survive that, but the Niners have built such a Death Star of a roster that, yeah, Brock Purdy might not be the 9th or 10th most talented guy or even best at his position on the roster, but he's been good enough in big moments to make things happen. And you have built such a great roster around him that it's helped give him a strong enough football foundation to go out there and keep maximizing his ability.
The part that's also so interesting to me, Mike, is I feel like a lot of the commentary, at least the negative commentary around Brock Purdy, is as if he's supposed to be a finished product right now. He was the last pick in the draft last year, and he was the last pick in the draft last year. He's only in his second year. They were in the NFC Championship last year. They're in the Super Bowl this year. So even if you do think he's a product of all that's going on around him, isn't there still a lot of room for this kid to grow?
Oh, that's what you wonder. And it's more difficult with Brock because he's not a guy with otherworldly physical skills. Like, usually we think of the freaks that come in. Josh Allen's always the example that comes to mind because he came in with all this raw ability and they were actually able to hone that in and focus all that energy to get the best out of that player with the skills. Brock Purdy's not a guy that's got an incredible skill set. And part of his appeal coming in was high floor. He's a guy that started 46 straight games to finish his college career. He operated an offense that had a lot of the moving parts that you see in San Francisco. And so he came in and I think was more adept early on. I don't know how much higher the ceiling goes now. Mentally processing some of the other things that you get just through sheer reps, those can certainly be there, but those conversations all popped up because people wanted him thrust into the MVP discussion because his team accomplished at such a level. And that's where comparison becomes the thief of joy, because he's not as good as Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, like point blank period. There's no argument there for me, but his team accomplished to that level. And so all of a sudden, to your point, he was thrust into conversations that no, at this point, he's probably not ready for it, his life cycle as a player. And that's not a slight at him. That's okay. But it's what happens when you come in and you're on such a good team right out of the gate, where now in your second year, you're getting ready to start a Super Bowl.
Does Belichick ever coach again?
I think it's getting more and more unlikely. It's going to take a real specific set of circumstances, it seems like, right? Like take the Washington job here. That was the last one to fill that people wondered if Bill might go in. Bill Belichick walking into a situation where you're talking about drafting a rookie quarterback and having developed stuff that takes time, an organization that's trying to reset its footing after being led by Dan Snyder for so long and finally exercising that portion of the franchise. Bill Belichick's timeline for it, wanting to win now, wanting to eclipse Don Shula's wins record, all the things that we know are probably at this stage in his career the priority, aren't going to line up there. And there were a lot of teams this offseason that fell more into that category. So I think it would take a very specific circumstance and a very specific franchise, which, we got Jerry Jones out here angling for the Cowboys, Mike McCarthy's seat blistering hot going into 2024. But I'd say it's unlikely, but not impossible given who he is.
So since you mentioned the Cowboys, I want to ask you about Prescott, but I want to ask from this perspective. And you're a guy who obviously played football. Your father played football. I didn't play professional football. I don't know if you know that. And so there's something that I always struggle with this kind of stuff, where I don't understand the dynamic where you have family members of teammates who are in social media and they're commenting about your play. And I don't understand the dynamic then that potentially, or maybe doesn't potentially, bring into the locker room. Like, there's not a moment where Dak says to CeeDee Lamb, hey man, why is your mom saying that I suck? I don't understand that dynamic. Am I the only one who has a hard time understanding how that works?
Oh, I mean, listen, we're all human beings. Like, I'm sure that stuff has an effect to an extent, but you also understand, like, all these guys got family members. I'm sure the ones that are even more low profile got family members that have said some wild stuff before. And you realize along the way, the player's not their family member. Like, you got a relationship, you know that guy well enough to know, hey, either they rock with me or they don't. You forge that, especially for guys that have been there as long as Dak has now. And so while it's absolutely something that guys are aware of, guys see, most players now are online enough to where they don't miss stuff, and most fans are ready and willing to go and snitch tag people and make sure they see this, even if it's not directly on their timeline. But I do think that's where you fall back on. And the biggest factor in every locker room is like, man, you spend so much time with these guys, and all that time under task either means you got that trust built up or you don't. And that's going to be separate from any of that stuff that happens. And the bottom line is that stuff also only starts to matter when things go poorly. When things are going well, who gives a damn? Like, whatever someone's got to say there, hey, we know what we got in here. When you got to worry is like the Cowboys, when all of a sudden the pants pooping at the end of the season starts and everything starts to feel a little bit harder and everything starts to feel more severe and you start to feel that pressure. Does it affect it at all then? I still think at the end of the day, your relationship with your teammate in that locker room, and I think that supersedes everything else.
Were you yelling at the TV at Dan Campbell last weekend?
No, man, this is who Dan is. I don't know why we're all acting surprised by this. Like, yeah, I get it. We're a bottom line business. We're an outcome business. But like, Dan Campbell goes for it on wild fourth downs. This is how that guy lives. This is how he's maximized that roster all season long. We talked to Penei Sewell on the show today, and we asked him about it. And he said, to us, it's just another down. Like, it's been coached into that team where it's not some special, oh my God, we got to tense up. It's fourth down here. It's like, no, it's the play, it's the down. We got to go out there and execute because we know this is what our coach tends to do. So I tend to look at this the way Greg Olson explained it, as it's a process thing. And I understand fans don't want to hear that. They don't give a damn, but it's like, this is how the team operates. I'd rather have someone who is consistently themselves in the most important moments in a way I can count on than someone who's all of a sudden going to change up and do the clammed up conservative football thing just because the rest of us are cowards.
Are you willing to pick against Mahomes next weekend?
No. I'm done.
Can't do it, right?
I quit that biz, man. I picked against him against the Bills. I picked against him against the Ravens.
Me
like
too.
I'm off the narcotic at this point. Are there And listen, I think there's a lot of like real football reasons at this point, right? We've seen the Chiefs all of a sudden become very secure of their identity in the postseason in a way that wasn't there in the regular season, where they were feeling it out. It's a roster that had different parts this year. They kind of had to tinker with what they've got, and they've got the two greatest scientists of offense in Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes. And then they had the backstop of a defense that for the first time in Mahomes' career was like really good, like top 5 defense good. And so that created sort of an easy, again, talking about the floor for this team, where they probably always knew they were going to be in the postseason. Maybe it was going to be at the 1 seed this year, but they just needed to figure out, all right, how do we best maximize all these parts? And we've seen that through the first few rounds of the postseason now. So I'm done picking against these guys. I'm done picking against Pat. It feels stupid. Kelsey found the fountain of youth. Like it's let's get ready to start having the dynasty talk. Let's get ready for an offseason of it.
Now, I know on Gojo and Golic, you guys cover a lot of pop culture. What are we watching these days? What series are you into these days?
Ooh, what series? So football season is this weird void for me every year where I go in and I basically get no other TV watched, and I'm really lame through a lot of that.
You're about to get a lot. February is the worst sports month. You're about to have a lot of time.
Well, but even coming off, like I travel for college football season and call a lot of those games, and so I'm playing catch up. Like I just watched Beef on Netflix that had been winning the awards this cycle.
I haven't
of
seen
the
it
Emmys.
yet. I know everyone loves it, right?
Phenomenal. I mean, dripping with tension. I felt uncomfortable the entire time I watched it for all 10 episodes, which was great. But no, I watched that. I will advocate for anybody out there. I don't recommend a lot of shows anymore. There's too much talent or too much content for people to try and consume. But if you haven't watched Shoresy yet on Hulu, and you've ever spent time around hockey players in any form or fashion, it's a spinoff of Letterkenny, which is an extremely popular show for a lot of people, especially in Canada. But it's about a hockey team playing in the no-show league in Canada, and it is phenomenal. It is super easy to watch, like 6-episode seasons. They're like 25-minute episodes. And again, if you've ever spent any time around hockey players, you will feel so at home in here. It's really sweet, it's really funny, and it's a really easy watch.
Oh, I'm going to watch that. That sounds exactly what I would love. I've never even heard of this show before. Shoresy?
Shoresy. It is incredible comfort food. It is one of my favorite shows to date. Like, obviously, there's been a lot of the big time ones out there. The Bear that everyone's really loved here.
So
we're coming off another award cycle where Better Call Saul didn't win anything as that show finally sunsets, and those were all great. But I'm always looking for, hey, what's something especially at the end or after the season that's like easy, bite size? I can consume this. Shoresy's your show. I'd recommend that wholeheartedly to anybody. You're going to love it.
I'm going to check that out. Mike, tell everybody how they can catch you and your father and everything you got going on.
Yeah, absolutely. At Gojo and Golic on all social media there. Gojo and Golic is a show that airs Monday through Friday, 5 days a week on the DraftKings Network, DraftKingsNetwork.com, the YouTube channel. We're streaming on Samsung TV Plus, Roku, and a bunch of other platforms there. We are normally 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern live every day, Monday through Friday. Me and my dad, Jesse Cofield, our coworker who operates out of the DraftKings studio in Boston, all next week at the Super Bowl at Radio Row. We're going to be there live in person. We're going to be in the afternoon, though. 4 to 6 p.m. Eastern, we'll be live. The best of is going to air from 8 to 10 a.m. Eastern in the normal slot just for that 1 week so that we can go out there and be able to pull ourselves away from the blackjack tables long enough to actually get out there and burp some takes at people.
You didn't want to do live 5 a.m. local time in Vegas next week?
You know, when push comes to shove, like I like to think at this point, like Vegas isn't really my bag. Like I'm more looking forward to the Super Bowl in New Orleans next year. That is my city. I love that place. I will probably die there during that Super Bowl. Vegas is a little bit tougher place for me to move around, but I know myself. By the end of the week, I'm going to have burned the candle at both ends enough to where they're going to have to scoop me up and wheel me over to the set.
Great job, Mike. Appreciate you stopping by always. Thank you so much, man.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.